Blender cookie.
Alright, this video is going to be a little bit different than usual. I'm going to critique my own work. Now, I'm going to limit it to only my flooded hallway tutorials because I think those actually show a pretty good progression in terms of quality from the ones I've done 2 years ago to what I'm doing now. And what I'm doing now still needs a lot of work, obviously. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. This right here is my first flooded hallway video that I made. And if I remember correctly, I had like 300,000 this. I had, I believe, 300,000. I may have it in the description. No, I don't have it. But I think this was 300,000 fluid particles. Now, it doesn't look good, but it's not completely awful. I did that with a laptop, and it just the 4-core with hyper-threading, so 8 threads, had a 4720 HQ CPU and 8 gigabytes of RAM. So that was pretty much pushing the limits to a degree. I still had a little bit of headroom, but that was pretty near the top of what I could do with that laptop. Now my critiquing is, I had no idea how to texture properly, and the fluid particles are way too large in my opinion. But again, I was, for the most part, limited by the hardware that I had at the time. But I do kind of like it. It wasn't bad for a first attempt. And this part right here, where you can see the fluid particles splashing on the wall, I kind of like that part for some reason. I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. And then the fully rendered portion, you can see my materials on the wall don't look all that great. For some reason it's only going at 360. Why is it going at 360 resolution? That's weird. But anyway, not that good in my opinion. But again, I have my excuses. Now this one I had high hopes for. Remember the Orville dam spillway incident of a couple years ago? That's what inspired this one. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this first. Now, I used fluid particles and Cube Surfer. And if you're not familiar with Cube Surfer is an add-on created by Eevee, the same person who created the molecular script. And all it does, it basically creates a mesh around fluid particles. That way it looks more like an actual fluid. It's a very rudimentary type of system that's like the precursor to flip fluids is what that's how I think about it. But I had high hopes for this, but it turned out awful. Now I'm going to turn up the volume because I did add some sound effects to this. Yeah, I got my desktop audio turned on.
Breaking news in Northern California tonight. Tens of thousands forced to evacuate tonight due to concerns the Orville Dam's emergency spillway could fail. Good evening, everybody. I'm Elsa Ramon. An emergency
Well, interesting concept, but the resolution on it was so bad. I mean, it looked like globs of nothing. I mean, it was just ugly. Now, as you can see, I did get a little bit better on texturing when it came to making the actual hallway, but the actual the cube surfer, it didn't look good. But that's partially because, again, I did this with a laptop with 8 gigabytes of memory, and this right here was pushing the absolute limit. I was on the edge of not having enough computer power to even simulate this, much less render it in any reasonable amount of time. But I mean, that water surface, the mesh surface just looks awful. I mean, completely awful. It's almost embarrassing to look at now. But I did like the whole idea of the lights flickering and lights going out, and then it's like a flashlight shining down the hallway. That would have looked a lot better if I used the glare node in the renderer. That way I could have added a fog glow around the emergency lights. There's so many things I could have done to this to make it look better. But yeah, that was my second flooded hallway. And then this one, which one is this? This is basically the same scene, except I cranked up the resolution just a little bit and tweaked the settings a little bit. And in my opinion, it looks a little bit better, but it's still not great by no stretch of the imagination. But I was seriously hampered by my available computer resources in this one. But this is pretty much like the other one. It needs a lot of work. Yeah, it was just awful, but it's better than the previous one. That's for sure. But man, it needs work. And then this one right here is the first one I made whenever I got my new desktop. All of a sudden, I can go from a maximum of like 1 million particles up to around 12 million is what I can max out on now, realistically. But right here, I got 5 million particles. And granted, the particle sizes, what do you want, kitty? The particle sizes are fairly large in comparison to the scene, but it's still not that bad. Now, I did render it 2 different times because I wanted it to be rendered with size deflection turned on and size deflection turned off. And in my opinion, when it's up against the wall, when the particles are up against the edge of obstacles and so forth, it looks better with size deflect turned off. But you have to turn substeps up quite a bit more whenever you turn size deflect off, because the particles tend to go through walls if you don't turn the substeps up. Now, my critique on this is just I needed more particles, smaller particles, and probably better texturing. Because as you can see, it's just a flat texture. I really didn't understand how to use bump nodes and all that stuff back then. I'm just now starting to really get more into learning texturing. And my lighting techniques back then, this was just a year ago, or almost a year and a half ago. My lighting techniques weren't all that great back then. But this is a vast improvement, in my opinion, over where I started. But this is mostly simply because of computer hardware, and I had the ability to take it to the next level. And this one is before flip fluids. but this is with the new computer system. Same scene as with the previous one, but this is with the built-in fluid domain system that's built into Blender. Now, it done okay in my opinion, but you don't have the foam, you don't have the mist, and even with a 768 resolution, which took forever to render, it still didn't look too all that great, but it didn't look awful either. It's a clean render, that's what I could say for it. The lighting is okay, but realistically, it needed better texturing, and it needs foam and spray and stuff like that, which you can add spray to the scene using the built-in fluid domain system in Blender, but it's not very good. I can't get it to work quite right. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Alright, this is my most recent one. And this is what I've done. I think, yeah, I just released this Monday. Kitty, you know you're being in the way. Now, my cat's being a pain. Now this one is set to 200 resolution. It rendered fairly quickly for, at 200 resolution. And it simulated fairly quickly. I mean, I think it was maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours to simulate. I don't remember. And I think it was about 2 minutes a frame to render. I actually put it in here more than likely. Yeah, it took 45 minutes to bake and about 2 minutes a frame, which is what I was thinking. And then right here, let me back it up. It took 8 hours to render this at 400 resolution, and it took 25 minutes a frame. Now, the reason why it took so much longer to render is not because it's because there was so much more particles and geometry and so forth, but it went beyond the limit of my GPUs. Now, I didn't have to render every single frame with my CPU in order to get past that crazy amount of memory that it was using, because I had 500 frames to render, but about the first 125, I believe, I could render with the GPUs. But once it got towards the middle of the simulation, like the middle 200 or middle 250, something like that, there was so much foam and so much spray that it was taking way too much memory for the GPUs to handle, and the GPUs would run out of memory, and it would essentially crash the GPUs. So that's why it took so long. But realistically, it was only taking about 5 or 6 minutes for about half the frames, and the rest of them were taking 25 minutes. But this right here, 400 resolution, I think this looks pretty good. Now, my critique on this, I have two critiques. One thing, I had a lighting mistake. You'll see it pop up right there. That it shouldn't have got brighter. That was a mistake. I was trying to create a flicker, which you see later on coming up right here. This is what I was trying to do, but for some reason I misplaced one of the keyframes for the lights, and it flickered at the wrong time. My other critique is I need to seriously learn how to use dynamic painting. That way I can make the walls and stuff look like they actually get wet. So, yeah. I need to learn dynamic painting. That way whenever the water hits the wall or whatever, it can leave that little wet look stain behind whenever it recedes back down. my cat's being needy. Now, my favorite one though, or out of this batch that I've done right now, my favorite is the molecular script. Now this molecular script version only has 189,000 molecular script particles, which that's my critique mostly for this, is it needs more than 189,000 particles. And also, this red lighting on the side, I don't really like that. After it was rendered, I really don't like it as much. I think it would have looked better with almost any color other than red. But that's just my opinion. And also, there's one other thing. If you look real close, I didn't even get these cubes sitting all the way on the ground, which I hate it. But if you look at the textures, I actually use bump nodes and stuff like that for the textures, and quite frankly, I think it looks pretty good. But after this 189,000 particle or molecular script particle version one this one, I bump it up to, I think, 1,490,000 particles, and I changed the textures a little bit, and I think it looks way better. Like the textures here, I think look so much better than it did in the other one, and also the particle color is more pleasing to the eye, in my opinion. Now, my critique of this, what would it be? I think it's right here. I think I needed to turn down the turn up the dampening on the particles just a little bit more so that they didn't scatter and all over the place, kind of like it did here. So it would act more like a fluid. Because it's kind of chaotic, but it settles down pretty quickly. But I think this one right here is probably my favorite that I've made so far. And it's not even technically a fluid. It's acting like a whole bunch of little balls. Now, this one, as far as the texture goes, this absolutely is my favorite in terms of texturing. The texture really has it looks like you could feel the texture, even though it's all just image textures and using a bump node. The lighting is okay, and the texture... Cat, why you biting my hand? Crazy cat. And the textures on the cubes, they're okay, but I couldn't get them to look the way I wanted. I wanted the texture on the cubes to be like that, what do they call that? Carbon fiber. And I never could get it to look quite right. It always looked flat. And I tried using a bump node and messing around with the normal node on it and stuff like that. But I never could get it to look quite right. Now this would have looked a whole lot better if I would have used more than, what was this, 1 million particles? If I would have used probably 5 or 6 million, it would have looked a whole lot better. But I was running out of time to, because when it came to simulating this, if I would have set this to say 5 million particles, it would have took me nearly an entire day to simulate or to bake it, and then it would have took a day and a half, at least a day and a half, maybe 2 days to render. And this was already, whenever I was finally started simulating this, started baking this, it was already Saturday. So I had to basically bake it Saturday, I think it was Saturday morning through Saturday afternoon, and then, or into Saturday afternoon, and then start rendering it, which it finished rendering about the time I got up Sunday morning, which that gave me basically a day to compile the animations so I could upload it for Monday. But anyway, this one, that's my critique. Not enough particles, and never could get the textures to look quite right on the cubes. But other than that, not bad at all. Now, I did mess around with Eevee a little bit, because while I had this rendering with one GPU, while I had the 1 million particles rendering with one GPU, I was using Eevee on this, messing around with it, and I never could quite get the textures to look as good in Eevee as I did with Cycles, and I'm sure part of that is my limited ability to use Eevee, but also Eevee's just not, it's never going to be as good as Cycles, but still not bad. But and I can't get stuff to look good in Eevee unless it's glossy, and everything in this is a little too glossy in my opinion. And of course, I didn't have any time to do any fluid type simulations here. It's all just rigid bodies. But because something like this, a rigid body simulation like this will bake in 10 or 15 seconds, whereas fluid simulations take hours. But this was still interesting, and you get past some of these lights, like from the cubes, and the camera gets further back here, the textures look better. These lights were kind of washing out the scene. I think these lights were a little bit too bright. I happen to like dark scenes because I think lighting techniques can really make a scene come out or come to life. And here's another mistake I made. You only see it for a second. Over here on the wall, watch when I play it. Right here, see it? It looks like the edge of a saw blade. And that's because I didn't have the shadow settings quite right. I needed a higher resolution shadow map, or whatever it's called. I don't remember for sure what it's called because I'm that unfamiliar with Eevee. But anyway, that's my critiques, and I hope you enjoy videos like this. This is a little bit off topic, or not, I don't know what, not really off topic, not typical for me. But yeah, if you have critiques of any of these, let me know, or any video, let me know and comment on those videos or here, and tell me what you think should be done to make it look better, because I'm always open to critiquing, because I know I have a whole lot to learn when it comes to stuff like this. But anyway, thanks for watching, and y'all have a good day. Later, people. Thank you for watching this video. Here are 4 other videos you might like. If you liked this video, please give it a like, share it, or leave a comment. I try to respond to every comment on every video, regardless how old the video is. Also, please support your favorite YouTubers by disabling ad blocker. Thanks again. Later.